Emmanuel was known by many in the bustling city as a mystery, a man who seemed to come from nowhere. He showed up one day at a small mechanic shop in a township, asking for work. He had the skills, that much was clear. His hands moved deftly, fixing cars with precision. But his story, it was always vague. He told the shop owner, Uncle Joe, that he'd grown up working on cars and needed a fresh start. Uncle Joe didn't ask too many questions. If you can fix cars and show up on time, that's all I need, he had said, slapping Emmanuel on the back. It wasn't long before Emmanuel became a favorite among the customers. Despite the grease stains and the worn coveralls he wore every day, his gentle demeanor and respectful way of speaking set him apart. Women from the neighborhood brought their cars in and lingered longer than necessary, chatting with him. But Emmanuel never flirted back. He kept things professional, which only made people more curious about him. Who is this guy? One of the apprentices, Cheek, asked one evening as they closed up. He fixes cars like he's been doing it forever, but he talks like he went to one of those fancy schools. Uncle Joe shrugged. Some people don't like to talk about their past. Leave the man alone. He does his work well. But the questions never really stopped. Emmanuel lived in a modest one-room apartment nearby and kept to himself. He didn't own much. No car, no flashy phone, nothing to suggest he had anything beyond what he earned at the shop. Yet, there was something about him that made people feel there was more to his story. One day, a young woman named Ada came into the shop. Her old sedan was making a terrible noise, and she looked worried. Emmanuel approached her with his usual calmness. "Good afternoon, madam," he said, wiping his hands on her rag. "What seems to be the problem?" Ada's voice was hesitant. "It's been making this clunking sound whenever I drive. I don't know what's wrong." "Let me take a look," Emmanuel said. As he examined the car, Ada watched him carefully. He worked quietly, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a few minutes, he stood up and explained the issue in simple terms. "Your suspension is worn out," he said. "It's not safe to drive like this. I'll fix it for you, but it will take a few hours." Ada nodded. "Thank you. I'll wait." She sat on a bench outside the shop, scrolling through her phone. Every now and then, she glanced at Emmanuel, intrigued by his quiet confidence. When the car was ready, she thanked him warmly and handed over the payment. "You're really good at what you do," she said. Emmanuel smiled slightly. "Thank you, madam. Drive safely." Ada found herself returning to the shop even when her car didn't need repairs. She claimed she just wanted to check on something minor, but it was clear she enjoyed talking to Emmanuel. Over time, their conversations grew longer. She learned he didn't have much family and had moved to the township for a fresh start. He, in turn, listened as she talked about her job as a teacher and her dreams of starting a non-profit to help underprivileged kids. One evening, as they sat outside the shop after closing, Ada asked him directly, "Why are you so private about your past?" Emmanuel hesitated, looking at his hands. "Sometimes the past is better left behind," he said simply. Ada didn't press further. She respected his boundaries, which only deepened Emmanuel's admiration for her. Months passed, and their bond grew stronger. Emmanuel began to look forward to Ada's visits. She'd bring him food after the end of her shift in the clinic and sit by his side as he worked. He seemed lighter around her, happier, and he always accepted the food she brought with gratitude. The other workers teased him, but Emmanuel brushed it off. One day, Ada's car broke down again, this time on a remote road. She called Emmanuel, who quickly informed Uncle Joe of the situation of things. Uncle Joe permitted him to use his truck. Emmanuel arrived within minutes with a toolbox. As he worked on her car, a group of men in a flashy SUV drove by and slowed down. They looked at Emmanuel, then at Ada. "Is this your mechanic boyfriend?" one of them sneered. Ada's face turned red, but before she could respond, Emmanuel stood up. His calm voice carried authority. "Is there a problem?" The men laughed and drove off, but the encounter left Ada shaken. Emmanuel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't let people like that bother you," he said. After fixing her car, he drove behind her to ensure she got home safely. That night, Ada couldn't stop thinking about Emmanuel. She admired his humility, his kindness, and the way he always treated her with respect, but something still nagged at her. Who was he, really? She decided to do some quiet digging. Asking around, she found that no one knew much about Emmanuel's past. Determined to uncover the truth, she followed a hunch and visited a luxury car dealership in the city one weekend. What she discovered shocked her. There, on the wall, was a photo of Emmanuel, dressed in a sharp suit, shaking hands with high-profile clients. He was listed as the owner of the dealership. Ada's mind raced. Why would someone like him work as a mechanic? She decided to confront him, but in a way that wouldn't embarrass him. Meanwhile, Emmanuel finally decides to tell Ada who he really is. He started making plans for the right time to disclose his true identity to the woman he has fallen in love with. The next day, she arrived at the shop with a quiet determination. After the workers had left for the evening, she approached Emmanuel. "Can we talk?" she asked. He nodded, sensing the seriousness in her tone. She pulled out a photo she had taken at the dealership. "Why is your picture on this wall?" she asked gently. "I have been meaning to talk to you too, Ada. I was just looking for the right time to do so. I haven't been completely honest with you. I'm not just a mechanic." Emmanuel replied, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I own a car dealership," he said. "A big one. I'm wealthy." There was a long silence as Ada processed his words. Finally, she smiled. "And you thought I'd care about that?" Emmanuel blinked. "I didn't know. Everyone else always has." "Well, I'm not everyone else," she said simply. Emmanuel's shoulders tensed. He sighed deeply and continued. "I used to run that dealership," he admitted. "But I got tired of people only seeing my money. I wanted to know what it felt like to be valued for who I am, not what I have." Ada's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't need to hide that from me," she said. "I like you for the person you are, not your money." Emmanuel looked at her, his expression softening. "I know that now, but can you understand why I needed to be sure?" Ada nodded. "Yes, I understand, but don't ever doubt your worth. You're an amazing person, with or without your wealth." From that day forward, their relationship grew even stronger. Emmanuel eventually returned to his dealership, but he never let it change who he was. He continued to practice the humility he'd gained from his time as a mechanic. Ada stood by his side, proud to love a man whose humility and character shone brighter than his wealth. He and Ada eventually got married, and their story became one of the township's favorite tales. Moral of the story: true love values the person, not their possessions. Wealth may attract people, but it's character that keeps genuine relationships strong. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to upvote, comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Let's share stories that remind us of the power of genuine connections. The end.